So today I want to talk about a Hopewell Native American site dated to Book of Mormon timeframes located in Circleville, Ohio. And I also want to talk about some evidence of the making of ancient iron in Book of Mormon timeframes in Ohio. And so to do this, I'm going to pause and share my screen. Okay, so Circleville, Ohio is located just south of Columbus, Ohio. And the south central Ohio area is the location for a lot of the Hopewell sites, sort of a central location there. And in particular, the Chillicothe, Ohio area is sort of a central location for much of the Hopewell stuff. Circleville is between Chillicothe and Columbus. Okay, so that's where Circleville is located. Now, Circleville is called Circleville because they there was a giant Hopewell circle and square located there. And when the early settlers in the early 1800s saw the giant circle, they decided to, instead of plowing it all over and making normal grid streets, they decided to use the circle and had a circle, and then they put their town square sort of in the center of the circle. So that's how it got its name, Circleville. The Circleville site had a giant circle and a giant square. This was built by the Hopewell. It's been dated to Book of Mormon timeframe, so just a little bit BC and up to about 400 AD. The site was one of the first that was documented as the early settlers came over into Ohio. This, by the way, the website here by Gerald C. Anderson is very good on the Circleville earthwork. He's a man who's from Circleville. Now, in 1772 is the first documentation of the Hopewell earthworks there. And this is a copy of that account. So this direction is to the north, and that's to the south. So the circle is on the west side towards the Scioto River, which is actually about 1,000 feet away. So this shows the river closer to the circle than it actually is. But anyway, in 1772, it was described to say that the circle had a regular entrenchment with two walls. He called the square a fort. He said the fort had about 10-foot tall walls on it. And then on the west side of the fort was a single entrance to what he thought was an entrenchment that could be entered only through the fort. It had a large ditch, which he said was 20 feet wide and 15 feet deep, and banks thrown up on each side of the ditch. Now, obviously, this sort of fits the description in the Book of Mormon for Captain Moroni and the building of the fortifications. With the Hopewell earthwork sites, the circles and the squares, these are very large areas, were likely assembly areas. Many of them did not have tall walls and are just like maybe temple or assembly type areas. There are some, and this Circleville one is one where it was built more in a defensive nature. So again, with a ditch being 20 feet deep, 15 feet wide, and additional embankment on each side, there was also thought that there was a palisade potentially around that. And this was about 1,000-foot diameter. So again, it was a large site, like I showed you with for the city. It was big enough that they put a Circleville, their whole town, their town building, and several blocks within this site. Okay. So this was the first description of the site from 1772. Now, after that, it was again described by a man named Caleb Atwater. And Caleb Atwater did a nice description of the site. So this was in in the 1810s or approximately 1820, he made another map of the site. He noted that there was in the circle a central mound with a ramp to it. There was also mounds on the outside of the Hopewell site. And again, here it is again. So the west is on the bottom of the screens. The circle's on the west. So this is sort of southwest of the site. There was a burial mound there. There was also some kind of a burial mound there. And then there were some burials with underneath the mound that was at the center of the circle. And there are a couple of interesting things about it that I'm going to read from when it was excavated. So, and let me just scroll down here and I'll get to it. So he spent some time talking about other Hopewell sites. Now he says, so here, the first two things, so some of the things that are unique about the Circleville sites was the large platform mound with a ramp that was at the center of the circle, and then also the two concentric earth walls with a deep ditch in between. So that was sort of unique. Now, one of the most interesting things to me about the site is when the central mound in the circle was excavated, there were some things that were found. Oh, I should also say, one of those burial mounds just outside, it had a burial where the skeletons were arranged sort of in a wheel and spoke fashion with the heads all pointed to the center of the circle. And the reason why that is interesting is that when Joseph Smith was traveling with some of his companions, it said that they came across a mound that had a burial with that kind of arrangement. See here, it's described: burial situated with their heads oriented toward the center of the mound. And that's been found at a couple of different sites. When Joseph Smith saw that, he told his companions to not disturb it, that was a Jaredite burial site. So, so that's an interesting possibility. Even though he said that, it's on the same site where we have these Hopewell earthworks, which clearly date to Book of Mormon timeframes in terms of 200 BC to about 400 AD. So it could be that it was a site that had some Jaredites there earlier, and then Hopewell later. Okay, so anyway, but another one of the mounds had something very interesting in it, and this is in Atwater's description. I'll go ahead and read here in point 2. Okay, so he said that in the central under the mound at the center of the circle, there were 2 human skeletons on the original surface of the earth. There are a bunch of arrowheads, and then he says that there was a handle of what looked like what he described as either a small sword or a large knife. It had some silver with it, and then you could see where the blade had been there, but all that was left was an iron oxide that was of the same shape and size of the, so you could tell from the iron oxide residue that was left that it was at one point an iron small sword or large knife. So this is one of the first pieces of evidence of the use of iron at a Hopewell site, which dates to the Book of Mormon timeframes. Some of you may know that the Book of Mormon talks about the use of iron. Nephi talks about teaching his people how to work iron. In the book of Jerem, verse 8, it talks about the people becoming good in the work of iron, among other things. So the Book of Mormon describes work of iron. That's one of the things that's been attacked at times as an anachronism, with people saying that there's no evidence of the ancient Native Americans being able to use or work with iron. I'm going to get into, in this video, a little bit of the evidence supporting the use of iron by the Hopewell. This is one of the first little pieces, which is Atwater's description of an iron oxide in the shape of a small sword or knife. So the potential of an iron sword there. But even though it had been buried, it was completely decomposed. All you could see left was the decomposed iron oxide in the shape of the small sword or large knife. And then he also talks about an interesting one here. He says a mirror about 3 feet in length, 1.5 feet wide, made out of mica. Actually, I should probably pull up. Let me do that so you can see, in case you aren't familiar with mica. Okay, I'll do that. And images. Okay, so this is fine. So you can see that mica is sort of one of those somewhat not completely transparent materials. And it appears that the Hopewell would use them a little bit like a mirror. And in this particular location had, he says, a base which what appeared to have been a plate of iron. So again, more evidence of working of ancient iron, which had also decomposed into just oxide. But you could tell that it was underneath and covered the back of this mica mirror, this 3 foot by 1.5 foot mica mirror, and you could tell what it was with a decomposed iron on the backing of it. So, and then he kept possession of that. Okay, so that's a particularly interesting site because of the evidence for the iron sword and for a mirror with an iron backing, indicating the ancient use of iron. Excuse me. Now, there are some non-members who have looked at evidence of iron in among the Hopewell, in particular in the Ohio area. And there is a book called Iron Age Before Columbus. This is done by someone who's not a member of the church. And I have the book here. Okay. Yeah, and the picture on the front of it shows him and his mentor digging into what was a furnace pit used for smelting iron. And what they would do is they would have a large pit, and then they would have an air duct that went down to it, and they can tell that it was used for the smelting of iron. They'll still have the glazed slag type glazed rocks, and they have been tested, and it shows still an iron content there. It was not the type of, the book goes into a description of the type of process that was used apparently by these people for the iron. It was sort of an indirect 2-step process, which is not as efficient as what was done by the time the colonials and modern times came over. But nevertheless, they can see what was done there. Now, in the book, it talks about a number of the furnaces and sites that they've seen. And let's go ahead and take a quick peek at. So this is this is from page 17 of the book. This is one of the pieces they found where they found casting still inside of a mold in one of the iron pit furnace. It talks about how much it weighs there and how he got a professional opinion to support that. It looked like it was a mold making an iron tool. And then here was another one that they found. This was a 62-pound cast iron bar at the bottom of one of these Hopewell mounds, and their theory of how that came about. So they've had a couple of incidents of that. Now, they're not the only ones who have found these sites. There are literally dozens of them in Ohio. He describes most of them, the most famous of them, are at a site called Spruce Hill. which is a little bit west of Chillicothe. And that is a hilltop fortification type site. And there are some descriptions of the finding of that, and I'll read that in just a second from the book. And then also there are a number of sites just north of Chillicothe in the Deer Creek area that have furnaces. And there's also then also some description of some furnaces that were found out in Hamilton County, sort of near the Cincinnati area in Ohio. So there's been multiple locations where they've found these iron pit furnaces. And I'm going to go ahead and talk about the Spruce Hill one. Now, many of you will be familiar with the Spruce Hill site. It's a hilltop fortification near Chillicothe. Let me pull this back up. So it's down, this is south of Columbus, south of Circleville. The Chillicothe is where the Hopewell, much of the center of activity. This is where the Hopewell National Park and the Mountain City and everything is. And there's this valley down to the left, and a site called the Spruce Hill Earthworks there. And it's basically just along a valley. You have a hill, a flat hilltop here. So you can kind of see it's a valley, and then you have this sharp rise on a hill, and then they had a wall all the way around the edge of the hill as sort of a fortification. And it was an ideal fortification because of its view, the steep slopes, and then you had the walls built around. And then it also had with it, even though it's at the top of the hill, a natural aquifer. And so it was like an ideal spot for the Hopewell to resort to for protection. It was very large, 140-acre site. Some have referred to it as the Hopewell Masada, meaning a type of fortified resort that they could go to for protection. But anyway, at this site on Spruce Hill near Chillicothe, there are description of a number of furnaces, pit furnaces on the site. And I'll go ahead, let me go ahead and stop the share there. I'm going to go ahead and read a couple of these from this Iron Age America's book. The first one of these was by a man named Foster. The Ohio area was started to be settled right at that early 1800s. And in 1814, there was a man named Foster who wrote a letter after first finding that fortification site at the top of Spruce Hill. And he wrote, okay, he didn't have the exact dimensions. He says, it contains about 100 acres and is enclosed by a stone wall, which, if we can judge from the quantity of stones, for it's in ruins now, must have been 12 or 15 feet high of stones at the edge of the ridge and 4 or 5 feet thick. He said, within the area, there are about 30 furnaces from which I took cinders and resemble in every way those formed in blacksmith forges. He said he also saw evidence around the furnaces of intense heat, glazed stones, baked clay, vitrified earth, and fire-cracked rocks. And this is from page 26 of this Iron Age America's book. And then similarly, just 6 years later, Caleb Atwater in 1820 went up to that Spruce Hill site. And Caleb Atwater at that time was the postmaster in Circleville, and so he was sort of one of the early antiquarians that did some investigation of Hopewell sites in Ohio. And in 1820, he went to that Spruce Hill site, and he said, and this is page 27 and 28 of the Iron Age America's book. He said, there were enough stones here to have furnished materials for a wall 4 feet in thickness, at least 10 feet in height. On the inside of the wall, there appears to have been a row of furnaces or smith shops where the cinders now lie many feet in depth. He said, I'm not able to say with certainty what manufactures were carried on here, nor can I say whether brick or iron tools were made here, or both. It was clay that was exposed to the action of fire. The remains are 4 or 5 feet in depth, even now, at some places. Iron ore in this country sometimes found in such clay. Anyway, he talks about that. So there was multiple investigators finding these evidences of furnaces. That was described as a row of 30 furnaces along that Spruce Hill site. Later, as described in the book, William Connor and his mentor, Arlington Mallory, discovered other sites, and there's a lot of pictures and information in there about some of the sites that they found north of Chillicothe, and like I said, I showed you the picture with the mold and the casting and so forth. So this is significant for the Book of Mormon because of the evidence of the use of iron smelting processes and the making of iron tools by the Hopewell within Book of Mormon timeframes. This has largely been rejected by the scientific community. One thing that's interesting in that Iron Age book, which I can't completely recommend because there's a lot of stuff that's not of interest. He puts in a lot of other extraneous stuff, and also they're not members of the church, and what they were thinking, and they were investigating before some of the carbon dating had isolated the Hopewell as being at the Book of Mormon timeframes and things like that. What they were after, what they thought was that this must have been Viking or other early sites. So that's what they were after. So a lot of that book is after, where did this Iron Age working come from? Where did these iron furnaces come from? And they are sort of on the thought or thinking that it might have been Vikings or that kind of thing. But the only sites that they found with these pit furnaces were all Hopewell sites. They're at the Chillicothe area, which is the center of the Hopewell civilization. They're at the Spruce Hill earthwork site, which is a Hopewell civilization, a Hopewell site and Book of Mormon timeframes, and then also the Deer Creek sites, which is a Hopewell site, and then the furnaces out near the Turner Mound Group near Cincinnati, that was also a Hopewell site. So they were after looking at maybe Vikings, but it's really all evidence of the use of iron work by Book of Mormon people. But anyway, one of the interesting things about the book is that he started to get his boss in particular, Arlington Mallory, back around 1950, started to get some attention for the pit furnaces. And there was contact with the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian said they would send somebody out to investigate. And it's kind of a funny little story there, because the Smithsonian person that was sent out was very hostile, wouldn't even consider it. And so it's a story of Arlington Mallory and the person from the Smithsonian who was supposed to come out and look at these pit furnace sites with him, but the Smithsonian person deliberately gave him the wrong time about when he would show up, so that the Smithsonian person could arrive and take pictures and look at things without the other person present to show him around. And how the Smithsonian person had no experience in iron making or metallurgy or anything like that. All he did was take a quick look at the sites. He saw some burnt lime in the areas and went back and said, I don't see any evidence that these are iron furnace pits, that this is just burning lime. And the Arlington Mallory then, responding to the Smithsonian, is like, what are you talking about? There's you didn't look at any of the evidence here of the slag, of the iron content. They tested some of the materials down in the furnace pits, and there was iron content there. They weren't looking at any of that. The story of lime, I guess some early farmers would burn lime that they would then use for agricultural purposes, but the particular spots there it was not next to any lime locations, and instead what it looks like was some lime was brought over and used to line the furnace anciently. But nevertheless, there's discussion there, and the head person at the Smithsonian wrote back saying, "I'm sorry, it's unfortunate. I realized this guy wasn't a specialist or anything. It's really unfortunate that the media already ran with the story, because the media already ran with the story that the Smithsonian had debunked it and that they weren't iron furnace pits. This was in that 1950 time frame, but it was supposedly debunked by a person who hadn't even been an expert in the area and had not fully investigated the information or site. So anyway, that's the information for today. Let me know what you think. If you're interested in this material or content, I hope you'll like and subscribe. I look forward to sharing more with you later. Thanks.